Hello again. Whenever the subject of immigration comes up, some fool will be sure to claim that we need all those immigrants to staff our hospitals and care homes, and also to keep public transport in London running. This ties in with a lie which dates back 40 years or so, that immigrants from the islands of the Caribbean were invited here after the end of the Second World War because of a labour shortage. In the 1980s, a strange story began to circulate about the immigrants who came to Britain from the Caribbean islands in the post-war years, the so-called Windrush generation. It conveyed the notion that their arrival in this country was motivated by an altruistic desire to help rebuild Britain after the ravages of the Second World War. According to this reading, all those men and women from Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and other parts of the Caribbean came not in search of a better life for themselves, but rather at the invitation of the British government, which was desperate for their help due to a shortage of personnel to operate buses and work in hospitals. This false perspective is now the prevailing and accepted narrative concerning Caribbean immigration to Britain. A good summary of the idea is found in a presentation delivered at the British Library in London a few years ago, titled How Caribbean Migrants Helped to Rebuild Britain. We are told that after World War II, Britain was a country short of workers and needed to rebuild its weakened economy, and also that in the service sector, both men and women workers were needed to run public transport and to staff the new National Health Service. This truly extraordinary idea that Britain invited immigrants from the West Indies to fill jobs for which no British workers were available is now taught in schools during Black History Month and may be found in many children's books. The Windrush generation saved our country from ruin. This is interesting because it ties in with the current claim that we need a lot of immigrants. Otherwise, there won't be enough people to run the hospitals and so on and keep everything ticking over because of our supposedly aging population. Inevitably, whenever the Windrush generation myth is raised, public transport is mentioned, and we are reminded of all the black drivers and bus conductors working for London Transport in the 1950s. The problem is, of course, that there is not a word of truth in all this. The sole beneficiaries of this immigration were the immigrants themselves and the countries from which they came, much the same as the situation now. Britain gained nothing from the whole business. Examining one aspect of the matter in detail will demonstrate the truth of the matter, and since public transport is one example that is always cited whenever immigration in the post-war years pops up, perhaps this might be a good place to focus upon. The story as it is now told is that London Transport was very short of staff, and so they turned to the West Indies and began recruiting people there. In other words, they invited immigrants to come and fill vacant positions for which they could not find enough British workers. The truth is almost exactly the opposite of this. While London Transport did experience some difficulty finding enough staff in the late 1940s and early 1950s, they solved this not by turning to the Caribbean, but to Ireland, Scotland, and the north of England. This worked very well. By the mid-1950s, 10 years after the end of the war, things had stabilised. This was not at all the case in the Caribbean, though. Islands like Barbados and Jamaica were experiencing increasing unemployment, which brought with it the threat of poverty, social unrest, and political violence. The governments of those nations were anxious to reduce unemployment and also get rid of some of the more hot-headed young folk. The best way of doing this was to send unemployed men to Britain. This is what led to the recruitment of black workers by London Transport, rather than any inherent need to import West Indians. In 1955, worried about soaring unemployment, the government of Barbados contacted London Transport and asked them to come to the island to recruit staff. So keen was the government of Barbados to send their unemployed citizens to another country that they even offered to pay the fares of those taking up jobs with London Transport. Two things are worth considering here. First, the request from the Barbadian government was made 10 years after the end of World War II, when Britain was more or less back on an even keel. Secondly, we note that it was the Caribbean nation which initiated the scheme in order to solve a problem which they faced. It was not that Britain particularly wanted immigrants from that part of the world. This was being done as a favour to a Commonwealth country. The truth is, Britain didn't invite immigrants from the West Indies to come to this country, nor did they want them. It is suggested that the very first of the Windrush generation, those who arrived on the HMC Empire Windrush itself in June 1948, had come in response to advertisements for jobs they had seen in Caribbean newspapers. This is quite untrue. From 1947 onwards, men from the Caribbean have been stowing away on ships to England in the hope of finding work. There wasn't enough work in Jamaica and Barbados, and some of those travellers faced starvation if they remained in their own country. Following the passing of the 1948 British Nationality Act, those living in the islands of the Caribbean who wished to come and live in Britain realised there was no impediment to their doing so. In the April the 6th issue of the Jamaican Daily Gleaner, tickets to Britain were advertised on the Empire Windrush, and hundreds of people bought them with a view to settling in this country. No offers of work were made in the advertisement. The large number of West Indian immigrants who flocked to Britain in the 1940s and 1950s were not encouraged to come here. The truth is they had poor prospects if they remained in their own countries and thought they might do better in Britain. The idea that we organised or promoted this immigration and that it was advantageous to this country is a myth that only appeared as late as the 1980s. It has now, for political reasons, become established as historical fact, and those who question it are denounced as racist. It's very useful today to justify the mass immigration that we're seeing because it enables those justifying that immigration to point to the past and explain that this is a continuous process, that just as Britain needed people in the post-war years, so too we're desperate for them now. It's a continuous thread, according to that reading of the situation. I'll speak tomorrow about the other fairy tale, which is that immigration saved the National Health Service. In the description to this video, I give a few links for those interested in this subject that want to check the veracity of what I've been saying.